Good morning, learners. Today we are going to do business studies, and this is Lingani. We will be dealing with the legislation today, and I would like us to make a quick revision on the 8 legislations that we have. And these are the following things that I would like us to look at. Legislation, the impact of legislation on the businesses. The first one that we need to look at is, what must I know as a learner if I have to work on the legislation in preparation for the exams? Legislation is there to rectify the inequalities of the past. Number 2, we know that when we talk about the inequalities of the past, we have to talk about the change in order for the transformation to take place. And if we undergo some changes, transformation is going to take some time, and it's not an easy thing. It's a difficult process. And the other thing is, legislation must reach the workplace. It doesn't help if we have legislation in place, but we do not implement this in the workplace. We also have to look at the importance of affirmative action, the fairness, and the diversity in the workplace. The abbreviations are given in different legislations, so it's very important that you know all these abbreviations. For example, BBBEE is one of them, broad-based black economic empowerment, and DPs, previously disadvantaged people or historically disadvantaged people. Those are some of the abbreviations that you need to know. And from there, the new legislation that started from 1994, the ones that we're going to do are 8. And the first one that I would like us to concentrate on is Basic Conditions of Employment Act. As you can see already, there's BCEA, which is the abbreviation for the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So that is why I said you also have to know these abbreviations. The second one is Employment Equity Act. The third one is Skills Development Act. The fourth one is Labor Relations Act. The fifth one, Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment. BBBEE, South African Qualifications Authority Act. SAQA, like I also indicated, there's an abbreviation there. The seventh one, National Credit Act, NCA. And the last one for the day would be the Consumer Protection Act, CPA. Let's start with the first one, Basic Conditions of Employment Act. What is this one all about? The most important thing in all these acts is to know the purpose of each one. Why is each act introduced? So the purpose for the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is to ensure fair labor practices are applied by employers and to determine exactly how workers must be treated in the workplace. They are actually designed, or the Act is designed to protect workers against exploitation and unfair labor practices. It includes details about work hours, how many hours workers will have to work, if they work for 5 days, if they work for 6 days, child labor, at what age should children be working, or which age is not allowed if a child is at that age to work, basic remuneration, overtime remuneration, working conditions, leave, you mention them. They will be discussed in detail later. And this act is applicable, is not applicable to the following, to the employees and employers of the following: the National Defence Force. The Act does not apply. Basic Conditions of Employment does not apply to them. National Intelligence Agency, the Act does not apply to them. South African Secret Service and volunteers, also not apply to them. Those who are rendering free services to the welfare organizations, it also doesn't apply to them. Workers who work less than 24 hours per month, does not apply to them. The sales staff who travel and regulate their own working hours also are exempted from this Act. And the other thing that I would also want us to look at is The maximum length of working, if it's per week, it should not be more than 45 hours. Then the other one is, if employees have a 6-day work week, the working hours are limited to a maximum of 8 hours per day. In other words, if you work from Monday till Saturday, you can only work per day 8 hours. If you're working for 5 days, then you need to work at least for 9 hours. The overtime is allowed only if there's an agreement between the employer and the employee. And if you work an overtime, you earn 1.5 times the normal wage you would normally get. And workers that work on Sundays and public holidays will get the double wage. Usually, if you are working on Sundays, instead of getting the double wage, you will instead get 1.5 times the normal wages that you would get. About leaves, every employer is allowed 21 consecutive days paid leave per year, that is 12 months, that has been worked, especially if the worker has been working for a year or more than that. 36 days sick leave in a 3-year period. In other words, in 3 years' time, you can be given 36 days for being sick and they will be paid. 3 paid days family responsibility leave per year. In other words, if maybe your child is sick or your spouse is not feeling well, you are given up to 3 days to take care of them. Or if one of the members of the family has passed on, you are given only 3 days leave in a year. If one is pregnant and goes on maternity leave, they are given 4 months paid leave. Workers who work between 2,300 hours, that is 11 during the night, until in the morning 6 o'clock, for 5 times or more than 5 times, or those who work for more than 50 times a year, also have rights just like others who work during the day. Workers cannot be forced to accept work against their will. In other words, if you're not prepared to do a particular work, especially if it's not part of your job specification or your job, the responsibilities that you need to do, you may not do it. No child under the age of 15 may work, but above that, a child who's 18 years who may still work may not work in the wine industry or in the casino industry. They may work, but not in the wine and casino industry. If you want to leave the work, you want to resign, you need to give notice. It's a 6 months. If say you have been working for 6 months, you will give a week's notice. If you have been working for 6 months and above, but less than a year, you will be giving a 2-week notice. If you have been working for a year or more than a year, you need to give a 4-week notice. But say you have been working for more than a year, but you are still on probation time, you would still be treated like somebody who has been working for less than 6 months and give just 1 week notice. The second act that we should look at is the Employment Equity Act. What is the purpose of the Employment Equity Act? Number 1 is to achieve equity in the workplace. Number 2, to promote equal opportunity and fair treatment. To implement affirmative action in order to redress the disadvantages in the employment. The other one, to ensure equal representation of all population groups in the workplace. To prohibit unfair discrimination and unjust medical testing of employees. Now, the employment equity continues. What is it that is required? Affirmative action has to create opportunities for the previously disadvantaged or historically disadvantaged people. And as they would be doing this or implementing this act in the workplace, there shouldn't be any unfair discrimination. They must ensure that persons from designated groups are not discriminated against in terms of race, gender, disabilities, age, HIV and AIDS, religion, but they must get equal opportunities in the workplace like anybody else. The groups that have been indicated above are known as the previously disadvantaged persons or people, or historically disadvantaged persons. The abbreviations, therefore, would be PDP and HDP. Employment Equity Act is applicable to bigger businesses. Those businesses that are employing 50 or more workers are the ones that have to implement this act. It's not legally enforceable for smaller businesses, but those who feel like doing it, following the act, implementing the act, complying with the act, even though they are in smaller businesses, they can do this. Because if they don't, they cannot do business with the government. They must always submit an equity plan to the Department of Labor, wherein they indicate how the transformation will be implemented in the workplace and include the time frames, how long it will take them to complete the transformation. It may be a year, 2 years, up to 5 years maybe. That should be indicated. For example, buildings must be adapted for persons with disabilities. If these were not there, they should be introduced. Every human resource manager has an obligation to take active steps to promote fair employment in the workplace. All companies must submit every 2 years a plan to the Department of Labor, which indicates the progress that they would be having in their plans. And it also states how the workplace is going to be transformed and the time it is going to take in order for the business to complete that transformation. It also determines exactly how businesses are going to apply affirmative action, yearly goals, numbers and time frames, who is going to take a responsibility. All that information needs to appear in the equity plan. Employers must create opportunities for the previously disadvantaged people and must not discriminate unfairly on the basis of race, gender, disability, or age as indicated above. If a business refuses to comply with this act, to implement this act, they will face a penalty of between 500,000 and 900,000, and therefore it means all companies are urged to implement the act. The third act that we are going to look at quickly is the Skills Development Act. What is the purpose of the Skills Development Act? It is to develop the skills of the South African workforce, to encourage employers to use workplace as an active learning environment, wherein all the employees who may need to be skilled, they can do this whilst they are working. They do not have to leave their work. Number 3, to improve productivity in the workplace. If workers are skilled, they will do their work better as compared to when they are not skilled. That is why Skills Development Act is so important. It also encourages workers to participate in the learnerships and other training programs so that they can get the opportunity to acquire new skills. It is there to promote self-employment. And South Africa, as we know, has a shortage of skilled labor, and this makes it very difficult to compete globally. So that is why it's so important that we implement this act and empower our people. Skills Development Act also has SETAs working with them, and the SETAs mean the Sector Education and Training Authority, who control the education standards in different economical sectors. So in other words, when we have the Skills Development Act, there's no way in which we cannot have these bodies, the SETAs, who will assist as these people are being given the skills to make sure that they meet the standards. SETAs are the ones who will be drawing up the training programs, the skills plans, as these people would be empowered. They also ensure that the skills for each sector make a training available, and they also develop training material. So that's one of the things they do. They have to make sure that each skill is there in a different sector, the training is available, and they develop their own material. They need also to register the internships, the learnership agreements, according to the agreements and the support. Also have to make sure that they use money from skills levy. They also have to be responsible for quality control in training, ensuring that required skills are available, because some of you may also know that in our families we do have people who have qualified or who are qualified, who have been to universities but are still unemployed. It could be because the skills they have acquired are not the skills that are needed. So the Skills Development Act, with the help of the SETAs, are trying to come up with all the skills that are scarce and give or empower people with those skills so that they can be employable. SETAs have the following functions. They draw up training programs. I indicated that one. Those are the functions of the SETAs. In terms of the Skills Development Levies Act, every employer in South Africa who has a payroll of 250,000 must register with SARS and pay a levy of 1% of their salary and wage bill to the Department of Labor. In other words, in your company, if when you count your payroll, it goes up to 250,000. 1% of that 250,000 is the one that should be forwarded to the Skills Development Levy. The 20% of that 1% you shall have contributed will be taken to the funds collected, and it goes to the National Skills Fund. The 80% thereof goes to SETAs. In other words, out of 100% from that 1%, the 20 is for National Skills Fund, especially those institutions or sectors that may not be included in the SETAs are the ones who will be benefiting from the 20%. All the 28 SETAs that we have will be benefiting from the 80%. The funds are used to develop the skills of employees, as they would be having the 20% from the 1% from companies, the 80%, they will be using this money to develop skills of employees. The learnerships are put in place to provide opportunity to obtain structured, formal learning and to get work experience. Businesses that participate can claim a percentage of the levy they have paid, say the payroll of more than 250,000 per year, and then they can go back and claim that percentage by having their employees benefiting from the training. Some businesses, instead of doing that, they would provide their own accredited training programs. They would not go to SETAs to ask for them to provide for the training. They would do that with the same money they shall have claimed from their companies in a form of that 1%. Then, in that case, the unskilled labor will be skilled, and when they are skilled, they will be more productive. That is why one can say training is necessary to restore the imbalances of the past, and with that, people will be in a better position to be employed. What are the advantages of this act, Employment Equity Act? To ensure that the level of training, not Employment Equity Act, but the Skills Development Act, to ensure that the level of training compares with skills requirements. Like I indicated earlier, make sure that the skills that are scarce, that are needed by the country, are the ones that are developed, and as a result, employees or people who have been trained will be able to be employed. To ensure that all businesses contribute to the cost of that 1% levy every month on their total spending in salaries and wages. SARS is also responsible for the levies. If it's SARS that is collecting, then we are assured of the effectiveness of the collection process, because they will not make a mistake of making the money disappear. They promote the effective training. They also ensure that employee and employer participate and accept the responsibility for the use of the funds. They improve job opportunities. They improve marketability of workers. They raise the general effectiveness in the workplace. The productivity is increased. They improve quality of education. They also develop skills. They address discrimination through training. And plus minus, presently we have 28 SETAs. These are just examples. One of them is WRSETA, which is a SETA for wholesalers and retailers sector. The second example could be INSETA, the insurance sector. The third one could be ETDP, SETA, education and training sector. The list is endless. Like I indicated, there are 28 all in all. And what are the main goals of these institutions? They are to improve the qualifications in order to improve the skills levels and thus to reduce unemployment. They also look to improve productivity, improve the skills of workers, to improve productivity of workers. Then we go to the fourth act, which is Labor Relations Act. They regulate the fundamental rights of employees and employers. They aim to protect the economic development, social justice, labor peace, and democracy in the workplace. Two stipulations of the Act are, number one, the freedom of association and general protection, meaning every employee has the right to join a trade union of their choice. Collective bargaining, which is a fair method to agree on wages and other working conditions, is also one of the stipulations wherein members are represented and they do it in a collective bargaining. What could be the purpose of this act? It makes provision for collective bargaining, as indicated earlier. It could be during wage disputes and other working conditions. It makes provision for the settling of labor disputes, for example, unfair dismissals at work. People who are unfairly dismissed can be represented by the trade unions to make sure that they are reinstated. They also make provision for the trade unions and discuss the roles and rights thereof. The roles of the trade unions, the rights of the trade unions. It also regulates the rights to strike. Because of this Labor Relations Act, employees have a right to strike. They promote employee participation in decision making through the establishment of workplace forums. In other words, because of this act, employees are now given a chance to also take part in making decisions that affect them directly. And this is normally done through the workplace forums. The employees have the right to belong to a trade union and participate in their activities. Number two, the participation in strikes, especially if the strikes are legal, not the wildcat strikes, wherein employees will be going on strike, will be protected. The participation in decision making through workplace forums and collective bargaining. For employers, this act would be doing the following: establishment and membership to employer organizations. They also have a right to start their own organizations. They also have a right to lock out during strike. If they feel that the staff is going to destroy the property, they will then lock them out. This act provides for that. And then the trade union also has access to the site and make sure that they are there, but do not interfere. They should not interfere at the workplace. And shortly, the workplace forums are the ones who would be requesting the trade union, for example, would be requested by the trade unions. If in a business situation or workplace there are 100 workers or more, this can be started, wherein all different people in the business would be represented in order to promote the interest of the workers in decision makings and to improve the efficiency in the workplace. Structures to execute the Act. These are the structures that execute the Act. The Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, CCMA, which can be used by employees who may feel that their grievances have not been attended to properly or to their satisfaction. When the case is now taken out of the business, they would now go and see people who are neutral. The Act also provides for the labor courts. If one is not satisfied in the grievance procedure, then they would go for labor courts. And then, above all, this is involved in the settlement of disputes, which will be discussed in another session. The Act makes provision for the following: the go-slow strikes, and one can ask, or one may ask, what is a go-slow strike? It's when employees are doing their work, but at a very slow pace. They do go to work, do what they are supposed to do on a daily basis. The only difference is they would be going very slowly. The legal strikes, wherein people get permission before they can go on strike, for the strike or people who are on strike to be protected. The strikes to protest, all three of them are provided for in the Act. There are disadvantages of strikes for the businesses. One of them, or some of them, could be if employees are on strike, a business is going to suffer because there will not be any productivity when workers are not working and they are on strike. And should a business not see any productivity, there will be loss of profit in the business. And if the business is losing profit, this may end up leading to the closure of the business. The fifth Act is the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment. And this one is seen as a mechanism for transformation, on ownership, on improving the access for black people to the economy. As indicated earlier, all those who were previously disadvantaged are now given a chance at being empowered. They need to have or own businesses, especially the black people. Through encouraging more black managers to access the management positions. Number 3, to promote access to finances for the black people. For the government to use different measures to reach its broad-based economic employment goals, to empower the rural communities through the infrastructures, the skills, the degree to which black women own businesses. They also use a scorecard to award licenses and issue of tenders. We will later look at the scores, which position is given more points or is awarded a bigger percentage in terms of the scores. Businesses sell shares to black people, and for them to be empowered, they need to be lowered in prices. Hence, they need to be cheaper for them to access them. And by so doing, they would be empowered to also be owners in big companies. Many businesses employ black women in the management positions. This is also appreciated by the broad-based black economic empowerment. This BBBEE also has challenges and problems. And what are those challenges and problems? One of them, only a small number of people are enriched at the expense of the masses. People would be empowered by being given assistance by the government, but only to find that these ones will be getting the money may not necessarily be the ones that need that money most. It could be people who actually don't need it, and they would be using it unfairly so. And that is one of the challenges and problems of the Act. There's nothing wrong about the Act, but when it comes to the implementation, people may misuse their powers or just decide not to comply accordingly. The Act also does not necessarily benefit people that need it the most, like I indicated. The advantages of the Act are to create opportunities for the previously disadvantaged. Number two, to provide access to capital to create new businesses and jobs or job opportunities. The implementation, how is BBBEE implemented? Many business enterprises are selling shares with the aim of empowering black people. In other words, we talked about the ownership earlier, which is one of the 7 pillars of BBBEE. So how can this be put into practice? If, for example, a business enterprise is selling shares to the employees, especially the black people or the women, we would be saying this business is actually empowering the black people through ownership, selling shares to them, instead of them just being employees. The preference to BBBEE when government tenders are rewarded, all the companies that are complying to BBBEE would also make sure that if there's a tender from the government, they stand a chance of getting one or winning one. They employ black people in the management positions. That's how it can be put into practice, the implementation thereof. Investment in black-owned businesses or black empowerment in businesses. Skills development for black people, those who may need skills in order to start their own businesses or after buying shares to understand how businesses are run, they would be equipped with skills which will enable them to run those businesses effectively. They also provide for the buying of stock from businesses that belong to black people, which will be part of the preferential procurement as one of the 7 pillars of BBBEE. The 7 pillars are ownership, wherein they weight the ownership in percentages in terms of the shares, or sometimes just outsourcing instead of selling shares to the employees. The management, wherein senior positions are now, or executive positions are given to the previously disadvantaged, only those who qualify to be in those positions. Fair employment, employment equity, wherein all people are represented on all levels, the senior levels, lower levels, middle management levels, and those that are in the senior levels will be counting more in the scorecard. The skills development, wherein there's the 1% on the black workers, a certain percentage on the black workers will be given. If you develop the skills of the blacks, you develop the skills of the females, then also a certain percentage of the points would also be awarded. Preferential procurement, the previously disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged, will also be provided for. The business development, investment or support. The 7th one, corporate social investments, amount that they contribute to different schemes in order to uplift different communities. And these 7 pillars are weighted as follows. The first pillar, which is the ownership, is awarded 20 marks, and the aim is actually to have 25% plus of ownership of black people or women. For management, it's 10 marks, and the aim is to have 40% to 50% of these previously disadvantaged people occupying the managerial posts. For fair employment, it's 15 marks, wherein the aim is to have 43% up to 80%. And then from there we have skills development, which is 15 marks. The aim is to have 3% of the payroll. The preference procurement is 20 marks. The aim is to go up to 70%. Business development, 15 marks, and the aim is 3%. The last one, corporate social investment, the marks only 5, and the aim is to at least have 1%. So this is how they would award companies that are trying to comply with the Act. You have a certain number of, or certain percentage of workers who are female, or those who are black people in the managerial positions. That's how they would award the marks. And this is what would be looked at if a company would be interested in making business with the government and check the scores that they would be having. And this takes us to the 6th Act, which is South African Qualifications Authorities Act, SAQA. It provides for the development and implementation of national qualification framework. It provides for the establishment of South African qualifications. It is responsible for accreditation and registration of standards and quality assurance to make sure that people who go to different institutions are not given qualifications that will not be accredited. They also contribute to the social and economic development of the country. They provide businesses with access to the national learners' records. They provide national standards to improve the quality of training and the relevance in South African institutions. What are the advantages of this Act? To standardize qualifications, to assess qualifications, and what could be the purpose? To give advice to the Minister of Education, to promote social and economic development, to monitor progress of the SETAs, to prevent false qualifications. And the 7th Act is the National Credit Act, NCA. What we're going to look at is the purpose of the Act, the advantages of the Act, and disadvantages of the Act to the consumer, to the provider, and to the country. In other words, it's the purpose of the Act to the consumer, the purpose of the Act to the service provider, the purpose of the Act to the country, advantages of the Act to the consumer, advantages of the Act to the provider, and advantages of the Act to the country, as well as the disadvantages of the Act to the consumer, disadvantages of the Act to the provider, and disadvantages of the Act to the country, to the providers, the consumers, and the country. All credit agreements must be in writing. The type of transactions that are influenced by National Credit Act, among others, have the interest. Some of them are the bank overdrafts, credit cards, mortgage bonds, hire purchase loans, and the rights of the consumers in respect of this are the following. The consumer must get a quotation, and all the costs must be included in that credit, wherein the employee will understand and know how much money he or she will be paying. Before credit is granted, the company needs to determine creditworthiness of the consumers. This will assist the business in controlling the credit. They also have the right to know why credit is not granted, and information must be available in a language that the employee, or not the employee, in a language that the consumer will understand. Information must be provided free of charge. The consumer may not pay for that information given to him or her. They also have the right to receive a statement every month wherein they are reminded to go and pay. In the language of the consumer's choice, the credit must be given for the consumer to understand what could be written in there. And then from there is the purpose of the credit or National Credit Act or National Credit Act. For the consumers, to prevent reckless spending, to educate them to make responsible decisions, to protect them against high interest rates, for debt counseling services which need to be provided, and to the providers, the purpose, to place more responsibility on them to make sure that they lend money in a responsible way. For the country, they make sure that credit agreements are transparent, fair, and easily understandable. To provide a competitive and sustainable credit market, to ensure economic stability. What are the advantages of the National Credit Act to consumers? Is to give them power and knowledge to manage their debts, to learn to plan their finances, to repay debts easily, and use the language of their preference so that they can be understandable, to make or have peace of mind, knowing that they are protected, prevent providers from taking back their goods. They cannot be placed on the blacklist, but instead they need to be counseled. For the providers, advantages are to make sure that they get the payments, there are no bad debts or irrecoverable debts, and they are able to make profit. To reduce administrative costs, and for the country, total debts can be reduced. Legal prosecution if irresponsible with lending. Raise the total savings of money in the country. Those are the advantages of the Act. The disadvantages of the Act for the consumers are they lower the standards of living because most consumers will not qualify for credit if there is a proper control, and this is therefore going to lower their standard of living. For the providers, these are the disadvantages: to reduce credit transactions, especially in the cars and property markets, and this will lead to lower profits and income in such industries. More pressure to have right credit policy and to apply it, an administrative burden will be there in order to make sure that they do not experience bad debts. If the consumer cannot pay, they must prove that it was done transparently. In other words, if a consumer is not in the position to pay, there should be proof that they were screened and they qualified to have those debts. And for the country, these are the disadvantages. This is going to reduce the credit transactions. And if the credit transactions are reduced, there will be less spending. And if there is less spending, the economic growth is going to be reduced, and we will end up having the economic downswing. The last one is the Consumer Protection Act, which was effective from the 1st of April 2011, and this is the overview of the Act. Consumers will now be guaranteed equal access to markets. The consumer's privacy will be protected. Consumers will have a right to choose. A fair disclosure of information to consumers will be given. Fair and responsible marketing will take place. And what are the aims of the Protection Act, the Consumer Protection Act? Is to protect, one of them is to protect, to promote a fair, accessible and sustainable marketplace, to establish national norms and standards relating to consumer protection, to prohibit certain unfair marketing. This is an overview of the Act. So, we are going to have a break, 5 minutes or 10 minutes hereafter. But now, before we can have that break, I have been a bit fast on the Acts because I wanted us to have an overview of all the 8 Acts. I'm going to encourage you to ask questions where you feel you do not understand. And then after the break, I will be showing you sample questions on how they would be asking questions on the legislation. And if it happens that you forget everything that one has been saying, please remember the following are very important when we deal with legislation. You need to know all these 8 acts and also make sure that you know the purpose of each one of them. Why was each act introduced? The other thing that you also have to remember is the impact they have on businesses. As these acts are being introduced, they do have advantages and disadvantages to businesses. You need to know the effect, the impact that each one of them is having on different businesses. The other thing that you also have to know, like I indicated at the beginning, is to make sure that you remember the abbreviations. And also make sure that you are in the position to apply the knowledge. If you are given, for example, a scenario wherein you are needed to apply knowledge, and for you to be in the position to apply that knowledge, you need to know the contents. You need to be clear with the content, understand each act properly, and it will be easy for you to translate and just apply that information you have acquired. So all these acts are important. Like I indicated, all of them are important, and you need to understand all of them. They ask them in the form of multiple choice. There could be a question in the form of multiple choice. There could be a question in the form of a direct question in section B. There could be scenarios and case studies. There could also be questions in the form of essays in section C. And we will see how these questions have been asked in the past and just show you how you may attempt to answer those questions, as they would be appearing in multiple choice or in section A, section B, and section C. I would be expecting questions. All those who have questions, feel free to ask. For more clarity, if I was a bit fast, then I can go back to the item which you would like me to address and make sure that you understand and get ready for the exams. We are now going to have break for 10 minutes, and then at 1:30 we will be continuing wherein I'll be showing you some sample questions. Thank you very much.